Namaste, everyone, and welcome once again to the Sunday afternoon with us on the Revive series. Today, we have someone with us all the way from Assam, and so I'm really excited and honored that she could make it. My name is Manisha Gutman, and I work with a social enterprise called Ecoexist. We're based in Pune, and we have been working in the sustainability sector for the past 14 years. Our work revolves around consumerism, urban lifestyle choices, and in general, we want to raise the awareness and the consciousness of people regarding the impact of their choices on the environment. The series that we're part of, the Revive series, started during the COVID lockdown in a very informal way as a chat amongst friends. And then we started to get requests and people wanted to join us. And so it has grown organically very beautifully. This is our 18th episode, I believe. And the intention of the Revive talks is basically to connect people to themselves, to each other in communities, and also eventually to nature, to revive our connection. We have had talks on various aspects of sustainability and of lifestyle in general. And today we are going to look at elephants. And the timing of this talk has been chosen consciously because yesterday in Maharashtra, we started the Ganesh festival. And for some time now, Ecoexist has been working on making this festival more eco-friendly. And I started to feel a strong need to reconnect this belief that people have in Lord Ganesha back to the elephant world, because I realized that we have very little awareness about what's happening with the remaining elephants in our country that live in the wild. Some weeks ago, there was a very tragic incident that happened with a pregnant elephant in Kerala, which captured the media, of course, broke our hearts. But this is unfortunately not a very rare incident. Such deaths are occurring quite frequently now as humans and elephants come into conflict with each other, as elephant territories are encroached upon by human communities. However, it's not a very simple issue. And it's easy for us to be romantic about wanting to save elephants. However, we do need to understand the complexities of this. And this is why we have invited Nandita here with us, based in Guwahati. She is an energy environment consultant, and she's the founder member of an NGO called Ecosystems India, which is a trust for biodiversity conservation in Assam. She manages the Assam Haathi project on human-elephant conflict. She has worked for 2 decades on issues of energy and environment. And she has worked with Terry and WWF India. She has a master's in geography and she's a Fulbright scholar. So we're really happy to have you. Welcome, Nandita.
Hello.
And so to help me host Nandita, we have also 2 people here from Pune. We have Dr. Prachi Mehta. Prachi is a senior scientist with the Wildlife Research and Conservation Society. She has been working on human-elephant conflict for the past 10 years in the state of Karnataka. And we also have with us Pooja Bhale. Pooja is a conservation biologist, and she's the director of an NGO called Protectera. She's an expert in community-supported agriculture, conscious living, and ecological behavioral change. And I specifically thought of Pooja for this session because she has a large farm here on the outskirts of Pune. And some years ago, when some of the captive elephants who were walking the streets for tourism were rescued, she hosted these elephants at her farm for a few months. And so she's had personal interaction with them. And I felt that she would enjoy this talk and also be able to share a little bit of what she did and what her learnings were. She's going to join us a little bit later in the session. So it's an all women's show today, Nandita. And with this, I think we're ready. So I hand it over to you. And if you want to start sharing your screen.
Okay. Hello, good evening, everybody. It's thank you so much for being here today. And I would have loved to be in Pune, but unfortunately, you know how the way things are. So this must be like a fastest flight to Pune through the screen. And thank you very much, Manisha, and thank you, Coexist, for inviting me to this talk today and making the efforts to support us. Um, and as you said, most of the participants today are women. And in wildlife, I think conservation, they say that wildlife conservation is very incestuous because everybody seems to know everybody, you know. So if I probably see everybody's faces, I'm sure I may know half the people, or they may have seen or know about me. So today I'll probably start a bit with, as Manisha said, that human wildlife conflict is an extremely important critical issue which has surfaced in the last 2 to 3 decades. 40 years ago, 50 years ago, nobody even talked of it, because the proportions or the levels or the visibility or the publicity about this issue was very low. Even community conservation itself as an issue, did not merit much attention. So I would say in the last 20 years or so, 20 to 25 years, the issue of community conservation, where the community should be involved. Earlier when people talk about wildlife conservation, it was only about talking about species, the flagship species, especially say, let's say the tiger or any bigger animal, and also the elephant, but tiger always takes the, the main place everywhere. But people realized, and conservationists realized, that if biodiversity, especially biodiversity which is endangered or critical or threatened, needs to be saved. You can't just do it, by just focusing on the animal or studying the ecology or behavior, but you also need, the participation of the community to save it. Because after all, in India, you can't have inviolate spaces like you do have in the Western countries, where you just completely cut off an area, protected area or any other area which you designate as a conservation area and say nobody can enter. In India, it's very difficult, extremely difficult. Although there is a school of thought in India too, which says that some certain spaces should be made inviolate and you can't have any interaction, which should completely cut off. And you have various, obviously everybody is entitled to their opinions. So people over time have realized, conservationists have realized, scientists have realized, funding agencies have realized, government has realized that, and researchers, and the community, that unless you have the support of the community, whichever way, it can be a passive participation or a active participation. Community participation is now pertinent, is important, to save a species. Doesn't matter if the species is as big as, large as an elephant, or as small or critically endangered as a pygmy hawk. You do need community participation. So today I'm just going to tell you that how we started this project, and how it has taken us almost a decade plus to reach where we are. So community conservation projects don't happen overnight. They have long gestation periods. So sometimes it's very difficult for people to understand that, why a certain project is not showing results, or why can't we not see tangible, impact. So in community conservation projects, the gestation period is very long. You're talking of not just 2-3 years, but you're talking of 10 years, 20 years plus, where you can act, because it needs a mind change, a change in the attitude, which can't happen overnight. So, and people who are willing to work on it need a lot of patience and resources, because sometimes working with the communities is like a black hole. You have to keep on putting resources, effort, and the time, and it takes a little while to see the impact. So if you allow me, I'll just tell you my, short, how did I end up working on this project. I'm not a trained biologist. I'm a social scientist. I have worked with communities, before I joined the project, but in a different field, mostly in the energy field. I had an interest in wildlife conservation, which I did it started from school basically. And most of us who are in Pune are familiar with an organization called Kalpavriksha. So that organization used to be based in Delhi. It started in Delhi from a school called Sardar Patel Vidyalaya, where I was one of the alumni. So it started with bird watching lessons, and then all of us graduated into those who had interest, and in our own different ways, we continued our interest and our passion.
Yeah.
But I must add that for us, it started as a passion, and then it got converted into our careers. But for a lot of youngsters today and the young professionals in this field, they are more focused. I must admit, they're more focused. They are, they have a scientific temper, and they now approach the issue and the solution, I would say, more with a much more focus and determination and understanding, especially scientific understanding. For many of us, that wasn't there. We never thought science of so much then. But now, of course, as we went along working, the science, of course, plays a very important part. So those who have been able to marry conservation science with the community, component, they have achieved success in whatever they have done. So as I said, I'm not a wildlife biologist. So very often people have this kind of, impression that to work in wildlife conservation, you need a science background. That's not true. If you have the interest, and you're able to garner support and have the determination, you can do it. So my journey into community conservation, was like that. It was not because I was trained, to work in wildlife conservation. So this project was started, the Assam, we call it the Assam Haathi project. This project was started in 2004, and with the support of Chester Zoo in the UK, where they wanted to work in a developing country on human-elephant conflict. So I have a little presentation with me. If I can just go through that, then it'll just be easier instead of looking at my. Thank you. I'll just. So as we go along, I will, talk of. So as Manisha said that, human-elephant conflict, not just human-elephant, but human-wildlife conflict, issues are very complex issues. There are issues which have emerged recently, so a lot of us are still grappling with it. We don't understand that fully. Many of us don't understand the issue fully. So I think right now everyone is trying to figure out what works, what does not work. So today we will talk through. I'll basically talk of the project I have been helped to operate, and in Assam. So we call it the Assam Haathi project. And as I said, we started in end of 2004, you could say beginning of 2005, with the help of Chester Zoo. And when we started the project, we did not want to be, we wanted to be species focused, but we realized that there were already people and NGOs who are more credible, who had the knowledge and the resources to work. They were already working on the species, but and also the efforts which are going in the community conservation were very few and sporadic. So we realized that if you want to mitigate this problem or find solutions, long-term solutions, you need to work with the people. So our approach was to work with the people, and through the people, but as conservationists, our underlying aim was to, of course, save the elephant. But when you work with the people, and already, because the whole issue of conflict in Assam was already bubbling, and it was on the.
Sorry, Nandita, have you shared your screen already?
Sorry?
Have you shared your screen? Because we don't see.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I think maybe 1 second, please. I'm sorry. I'm a novice at this, so please do forgive me for this.
I need to share it?
Yeah, is it?
Yeah.
Share, yeah. Okay. Sorry, guys. Can you see this now?
Full screen.
Huh?
Yes, yes.
Huh? Can you see now? Yeah, Manisha, I suppose.
Yes,
Yeah?
we can see.
Oh, okay, you can. Thanks. So, yeah, as I was saying that we started this in Assam, and it had there were only a couple of districts out of in Assam which were really suffering from this issue, particularly one of them called Sonitpur. So we started our work first there, but and then we decided to slowly scale it up. And we did not want to. Our whole approach was that we start from the bottom. A lot of the bigger organizations were working on the landscape level, and we just started off. We were still very small, and we wanted to start on a micro level and not jump onto the landscape level. So we thought we'll start from the bottom and then work upwards and see how we could help the community. And the community was also very apprehensive because and they were not confident, and because they saw the elephant as somebody. It's very ironic, how it's a paradox actually with the community. On one hand, they revere the elephant, they talk of Ganesh Baba and Ganesh Ji, and they worship. But on the other hand, they also fear, because these individuals come and create havoc, because they have the reasons for creating, entering villages and looking for food, and then the conflict, ensues. So, but before all this, I would also like to talk a bit about why it is important to understand that why elephants behave in a certain manner, and what and because we have certain mindset, we have preconception about how elephants are supposed to behave, or whatever we know of from our knowledge, from the books or watching films, or so on and so forth. So we expect them to behave in a certain fashion, but that's not the way the elephants behave, or any other animal, because they are forced by circumstances. And when they're forced by extreme conditions, they react just like humans do. And everybody knows that elephants are extremely intelligent animals. They can adapt, they can learn, much faster than any other animal. I mean, other than dogs, I guess, but domestic animals. But so the features which an elephant has, be it ears or its trunk, everything, its feeding habits, its movement pattern, all that builds towards the conflict situation. So how an elephant will behave during conflict situations, and why certain unfortunate events happen when either people die or elephants die, So, for example, we all know that, I mean, these are the characteristics I'm showing of elephants. Everybody probably knows, that elephant is a vegetarian, they eat lots of food. But if you link why, that's the reason why elephants need to move, because if they stay in one place for too long, they'll probably just finish, all the vegetation. So it's in their nature to move. Why people would think, why do they need to move? Why should they go if there is so much threat to their lives and to their, well-being? Why should they move around? It's in their nature to move, So that very few people, understand, at least at the community level. They understand a lot of other things. Now, of course, if you talk to people in Assam, they know that why this conflict is happening. People are sympathetic, they're empathetic, but they say that what do we do then? What is the way out? So for the elephants also the same thing. So because they need that kind of food, the quantity, the quantum of food they want, and the water, so they need to move. And because when they move, they have to move through habitation. Earlier they would move through probably habitation plus forested areas, and let's say 30, 40, 50 years ago, like the problem of conflict in Assam has emerged only in the 90s. It wasn't there before. I mean, not at the scale which we see now. So it's not that the elephants didn't move then. They moved,
Nandita,
but they were not visible. Yeah. Sorry?
Lalita, I just wanted to say that please tell us about the elephants also,
Yeah. Oh, okay.
because we may not fully understand. So don't assume that we know because we don't.
Okay. So one thing is that I mean everybody knows the difference between African and Asian elephants. So I'll come to that also a bit, the distribution and everything. But if you talk about, so there, the Asian elephants, so the elephants which you find in India are the Asian elephants. The females don't have tusks, whereas both African male and female have tusks. And something I see very often is also, in a lot of the advertisements they show in India, they show the African elephant. So sometimes you wonder, you're talking about the Asian, so you talk of Incredible India posters, and then suddenly you see an African elephant, so you wonder, I mean, are you talking about Africa or India? So I don't know if one of you recall about, I think maybe about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, I think in the early 2010 or 9, there used to be a advertisement by a bank called IDBI, where they showed a little boy playing with elephants, calves. And actually that whole film was shot in South Africa in an elephant rehab center. They said that it's cheaper to shoot in in Africa, in South Africa than in India. And also it's easier to approach elephants in the African landscape. When you go for your safaris to Kenya or Tanzania, you can go very, very extremely close to elephants, even though you are in one of those jeeps. But in India, it's impossible. You cannot go that close. So you have to be extremely careful. A lot of people take chances. They want to take pictures. They want to take selfies. So you have to be extremely aware and cautious that when you see wild elephants, you do not, go close, and you try and get out of the scene as fast as possible. The elephants will not attack you immediately. They always give you some sort of a warning. You'll see they'll start flapping their ears or kicking dust or making sounds, basically to scare you that, move away. So it's extremely important, especially tourists, as a tourist or as a visitor, when you go into wilderness areas, you should not take your chances. There have been unfortunate accidents in Kaziranga in Assam where tourists have gone very close thinking, that nothing will happen, or they try and confuse it with the behavior of African elephants maybe, and they've got killed. Even in the villages, where we have incidents where people have been killed, you have, people who actually go with garlands close to the elephant because they want to, I mean, I understand and fully appreciate their sense of piety and, reverence towards a god. But, a lot of people have gone so close to the elephant because they want to pray and worship, and they've got, injured or killed. So it's extremely important that we know what sort of behavior to adopt when we approach elephants. So elephants are as scared by us, as we are. So the other thing we also is important is to understand how the social life of these animals, what kind of life they lead, what kind of structure do they have. So when we talk of conflict or elephants coming into a inhabited area, what kind of elephants coming? Kind meaning, I don't mean the species, but rather, what age group, or are they males or are they females, So everybody knows that herd is led by a matriarch, you know. So the woman or the oldest female takes charge, and we have noticed, and these are our observations during our work, that very often the older adults and the young ones do not create that kind of, depredation or damage to inhabited areas. They tend to, when they move through inhabited areas, they tend to mostly not enter habitation. They tend to go through the fields or open areas. So much of the credit or discredit, I would say, goes to the younger, the juveniles. Like you have, the teenagers, you can say, the teenagers of the teenage elephants, very often the males are the ones who would sort of make these splinter groups, and for fun, or they would or in search of salt. Salt is very important. Salt, alcohol, fruits, food basically, they are attracted, and they are the ones who tend to create, situations where people suffer. Property may get damaged, crops, of course, through the elephant movement. So much of the damage to property and to human beings or to people are come about when these juveniles enter the villages or the inhabited areas. So so as I said, the elephants are in a move. They may stay in a place, for some time, and then they start moving. And this movement within an area is called the home range. So this home range may vary from 100 km plus, and elephants can really cover long distances. Even though sometimes they seem very large and ungainly, but when they start to move, they can quickly very fast. They can cover a lot of distance, and a lot of people think that elephants are there everywhere because they can move long distances. The same herd can be at you can see them at two different places in a matters of week. And then so there is this thing, people say, oh, there are lots of elephants everywhere, because they don't uh, identify the elephants. So or they can't identify, and most of us can't identify elephants, particular individuals, I meant, not as a so they think that there are lots of elephants everywhere, but actually that's not the issue. There aren't elephants, they're just more visible now. So as I was saying, that the elephants tend to move long distances, and the movement pattern follows certain routes, and these routes are more or less identified by them. So it's not that they will just go anywhere, anywhere whichwhere. So these are routes which they have been following for many years, and then and that gets imprinted in the progeny. So the matriarch will pass that information to her children, and then so imprinting is another very important issue here. So when you talk of elephant behavior, so in the recent times when you see conflict and the way elephants behave now, that also gets imprinted in the juveniles, in the young ones. So they also start behaving like their elders later, so which they may otherwise in wild conditions, or in protected areas, or may not behave that way. So and they've been also using the same corridors over years. So let's say 50 years ago, like for example in Assam, people say that this conflict is something which they witnessed only about in the 90s, so which means, and the elephants are still following the same route. So in Sonitpur district in Assam, the elephants come from the forest, move from the forest towards the river, which is a north-south movement. And when they're doing that, then since they pass through villages, the fields, and there is food there, they tend to feed on that, and that creates conflict situation. So the Indian government has declared, including the Assam government, has declared certain corridors as elephant reserves in Assam. There are 5 of them in Assam, but unfortunately, these 5 reserves still do not enjoy a legal status. There is currently a issue in Upper Assam. There's a reserve for the digging Patkai, corridor, where because of mining by the coal mine, the coal mining for coal is creating a lot of problems for this elephant reserve and the corridor. So that's another issue, maybe we can discuss later. But this is, because it does not have a legal entity right now, it's not a legal entity, there are issues how to, solve this problem. So this is just a map showing that where the major, elephant routes are. So there's an organization called the Wildlife Trust of India, which is based in Delhi. They also work in Assam and other parts of the country. So they have brought out a very interesting book called The Rite of Passage, where they have mapped all the elephant corridors in the country. So I think a PDF version is available in their website. So if anybody is interested, they can have a look. So they've done a lot of good work. They have mapped it out, and it's great help, this book. So when we talk of the Asian elephant, we are talking of the distribution of this. Where do we find it? So it's only restricted to 13 countries in South Asia and Southeast Asian countries over, over almost 4 lakh, almost say 5 lakh square kilometers. So it may seem a huge area, but compared to Africa, it's not that much. And wild population, people talk of the wild population. So wild population is up to around 50,000. And of that, almost, I would say, 50 to 60% are found uh, in India. And in India, Assam is one of the states which has a pretty high elephant population. And how do you know that these are the numbers? So these numbers are based on studies, on census surveys, and estimations which the government has done. That is the Forest Department. The various respective state forest departments under the Ministry of Environment and Forests and Climate Change. They do it. Then independent organizations like through our project, we also did some studies, on the elephant movements and populations. And there are scientific organizations, education, universities, research organizations which have done. So all of them have different, but there is still a paucity of reliable data. See, the census which is done by the state forest departments, they do it mostly in the protected areas, the inviolate areas. But nobody, because an elephant is a migratory animal, so at any point of time, you'll see animals in the forest, meaning which are protected areas, which are national parks or sanctuaries, or outside. They can be reserve areas, or they can be villages, tea gardens, anywhere. So we don't know at any point how many are inside and how many are outside. The PAs. So inside the PAs, they do census and they find out numbers. But how many we have, what is the estimate outside of these PAs is again a matter of concern, and it's a matter of concern because we don't know what is the exact. So these are estimates given by agencies compiled together, and we have. So how you exactly get 5719, that itself is a bit of a. So to say approximately, let's say 5,000, individuals would be better. Or if you go to a wildlife sanctuary or a national park, sometimes you see these big boards, which says number of animals. It's a tiger, okay, so many. Then they also write, I think, number of snakes and number of some lower taxa. They will write, how do you figure out, how many number of snakes, or like butterflies or some, I don't know, whatever. So that. So so this is one of the issues also, that what is the exact number, of elephants actually is. So we did a small study. We studied the absence and presence of elephants in Assam. This was done almost about 6-7 years ago, the study. So we found that, earlier the elephants, the conflict situation was restricted to only a few districts. But now currently almost, more than 60% of the districts of Assam suffer from the conflict issues, and in some of these districts, people have become used to it. They understand why this is happening, and they've taken it in their stride, and they've learned to live with the elephants. But in many districts in the recent years, this problem has emerged. So there the the community finds it's extremely difficult to cope with this. So they don't know what to do. Just to see a huge animal, in your backyard itself is a very distressing, situation. So, and then that animal having to, damage your property or your crops or inflict injury again becomes, so for people it's very difficult to accept that situation. What a lot of people fail to see it, or we as a community fail to see, is that we are also intruding and encroaching on an elephant's domain, their home. So they also probably feel the same way, so the feeling is mutual. And why does this happen? Why does this whole conflict situation happen, and what is the relation? So when we talk of community participation, why do we talk of community participation, or why do we need to involve the community in conservation issues? Is because there is a link, because people are dependent on forests and grasslands. Grasslands is another ecosystem, which is neglected. When people talk of wildlife, they only link it, or only the forests come into mind, the thick forests, large canopies, that's what comes into mind. They think very little of grasslands. Whereas much of the biodiversity in Assam is in the grasslands of, let's say, in Kaziranga or in Manas, on Bornadi, all along the. So grasslands also play an extremely important role. So that is something which has been overlooked in the past. People don't, the tendency was always to focus more on forests and closed canopy forests, not so much. So forests and grasslands. Obviously there is the eco, they provide a variety of ecosystem services, and directly, indirectly, they contribute to your water, groundwater supplies, your levels of, quality of air, then obviously the vegetation. But for people, our link with the forests and grasslands is for our immediate needs, needs for fuel, fodder, food, medicinal purposes, medicinal herbs. So people, irrespective, people will not see whether a forest is a national park or a wildlife sanctuary, or is it an open access forest. People by nature will access the area nearest to them for their needs, and that has, especially where national parks and sanctuaries have come up or protected areas have come up, that has led to a lot of conflict with the system, because it's the forest department which are custodians of these PAs. So obviously when people come in to harvest certain resources, there is conflict, and so people tend to take an anti-department stand, and it's vice versa, because the department feels that the people are violating their spaces, and the community feels very betrayed in some ways, and they also think that they have been denied what is their right, rights which have been traditional rights uh, for access of resources. So a lot of these needs of the community are bona fide, meaning this for their own personal use, personal consumption, for the subsistence, level. But then there are also everything is also not very hunky dory, in the sense that not everybody is, not all the community members do this only for bona fide needs. They also do it for income, for commercial needs. So a lot of firewood is also extracted, just not for their home use, household level use, but also for, commercial. So you have people who, go into the forest, nearest forest, and extract fuel wood for commercial needs. Then they indulge in hunting. Some hunting can be for, for your own personal consumption. In many communities in Northeast, the consumption of wild meat is considered absolutely, it may be not be acceptable to a lot of people, but it's a part of the tradition, and they do it. Of course, now it's happening with more sophisticated arms, and it's not traditional, so you tend to overhunt. And some people, a lot of people do it for sports, for recreation, which is illegal. So the resource use has also gone a change over time, so we have to see that it's not just, and so of course for tourism people do go. So when all this happens, obviously there is more pressure on these ecosystems. And when this pressure, and then this pressure gets manifested in different ways. So you have the habitat where the different wildlife species, which they use, gets fragmented. So you're unable, for example, in the case of elephants, to move from one forest to the other. So if there's in the middle part of, let's say, the forest is cut down for either wood, or it's converted into some use, they are unable to then cross over, or if they cross over, then there is obviously conflict. So habitat fragmentation happens because when you overuse certain resource, and and this fragmentation is also because of encroachment, because encroaching, you're not supposed to, but a lot of it is illegal. So when people collect thatch for their roofs, and then you have development projects, which are come up without studying the wildlife or the movements of animals, not just elephants, but other animals, also larger mammals, who migrate long distances. So in Assam, for example, and also in West Bengal, North Bengal, uh, in Assam and other parts of country too, I mean, where there is a sizable elephant population, you have had these incidences where trains, elephants have been run over by trains. And it's very unfortunate, but it has happened and it happens regularly. Efforts have been made, NGOs and other agencies have had talks and discussions with railways. So for that time being, certain things happen, certain steps are taken, but I think nothing has been foolproof in that sense. The people are trying, and one of the major issues of or the ramification of all this is the human wildlife conflict. So that is an issue which has, as I said, emerged. It was something which was probably at a much lower level and lower scale, maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago. You would have, people would be killed by, say, a carnivore or by elephant or by bears or whatever. But then it was one of very few, but not at the proportion you see today. And it's not to say that, and it's not just elephant. This human wildlife conflict, is extended to other animals. You have boars now, wild boars. Then you have monkeys. Of course, elephants are there. Then carnivore, bears, and depends on the countries. In other countries, like for example, in the Scandinavian countries, the wolf, and there people have a very low tolerance towards. I mean, in India, we are still lucky. I mean, wildlife is there, is existing, is still there because of our tolerance. I wouldn't want to. It's not fair to blame the community all the time. It's because, and it's intolerance. There is tolerance. That's why we see wildlife today. I mean, despite 1.1 billion population, we still see elephants, we still see tigers, and a lot of other, rich biodiversity is still there. But in Scandinavian countries, I mean, there's even if one wolf, depredates, there's a depredation by the wolves, it's just immediately shot or some action is taken against that poor individual. So there, I mean, people tend to think that sometimes in the West, decision making is better. I can understand maybe it's better there, in some cases, but such decisions are taken, which we will not do that in India. So we still have a very, very high level of tolerance. And I think that's one of the reasons why, despite all the problems, of conservation, whichever way, I mean, wildlife is still thriving in India. And Northeast is particularly lucky, we have a good percentage of forest still there, good, and forest which is of good quality. Not so much in Assam now, we have only pockets left, but other northeastern states like Arunachal Pradesh, for example, has extremely good forests, and almost, 30% of the state's forest is, state's area is under forest cover. So quickly coming to why this conflict happens, people have, sometimes people have, I wouldn't say, they are not aware fully, what constitutes conflict. Just because an elephant comes into your area does not mean conflict, or if you go into a elephant's home range does not mean conflict. So something has to happen. It's like somebody who comes into your house, let's say unannounced. You can call him an intruder, but if he or she doesn't do anything, then that would not be considered conflict. So it's in the same way. So just observing elephants, or if you see elephants in your village, or people see in their area, doesn't mean there is conflict. Or if you happen to go into a forest area where you see elephant, it's their area, their home range, that's also not conflict. So something has to happen. There has to be some interaction, and some interaction where where you are putting hurdles, or it results in some sort of damage, as I said, damage which can be to property, to your crops, to the humans, or both the parties, basically damage to both the parties. So if that happens, there should be a then only it constitutes conflict. So so if there is a herd of elephant or a group of elephant which is passing through a village, and let's say it's not doing anything, it's just going from it's following the path and going, say, let's let's say, to a source of water, and then they're leaving. So that's not conflict, But a lot of people will misconstrue that as conflict, because the minute something has come into your area and intruding, you assume that there is conflict, So very often there may be areas where you may see elephants, but if there's no situation, or if there is no, signs, incidences, then we would not consider it as a conflict. So as I said, what causes conflicts? Same reasons. I mean, in Assam, and it's true of other parts of the country also, encroachment is a major issue. Where you've encroached, you have destroyed the habitat of the animal, in this case the elephants, and that encroachment then leads to degradation of habitat, and this encroachment can be for various reasons. So you had, I myself has witnessed in the mid 90s the reserve forest areas, which were, from the district Sonitpur, which leads to, if you go further north towards Arunachal Pradesh, there's the Saridwar, there's a reserve forest called Saridwar, and that means Chardwar, 4. And it had good forest, and over time I've seen that entire area getting decimated, So degradation, when it was happening, people 10 kilometers south of those reserve forest areas, nobody paid any heed. They thought this is something which is happening 10, 15 kilometers, north of where I'm staying. There's no way, So people ignored large scale deforestation, extraction of wood, and encroachment in these areas. And it was happening, and over time, slowly the habitat got fragmented, and the elephants who were resident or whose home range was that, they started to move, because there was not enough for them there. And then people suddenly realized that the problem, or which they thought, I mean, they never thought that was a problem. They thought that was something in distant future, something which is not going to ever affect them, is now directly impacting them. So very often, certain situations take place where we tend to be either, we pretend to be ignorant about it, or not, or be indifferent about it. I mean, it's true of all of us, if there's something happening elsewhere, you won't care. I mean, unless it's happening in my backyard or in my locality or in my vicinity, I may be, or it's happening to me directly, I would be affected. But others, I won't care less, So that's general attitude. But now, because of the destruction of forests 15, 20 kilometers north, people in the south are suffering, that area suffering. And
Nandita, can I ask you a question?
Yeah. Yes, please. Sure.
Yeah. Just sorry, I'm also just a word of caution. There was a huge power blast here, so I'm on my phone.
Okay.
You have plenty of time, but I might drop off. But the team is there anyway. But I just wanted to ask. You were saying that the elephants move. So just a very basic question. So is there never a place that they call home? They're always on the move?
No, yes. So that's the area or the territory, For other animals, it's called a territory. For an elephant, it's a home range, as we say.
So the entire range is home to them?
Yeah. So as I said, it could be almost 100 kilometer plus. It can go as high as 600 kilometers.
And
square kilometers.
Do several herds use the same home range, or it's one herd that has one home range?
Several can use. Several. Because you see, you may move out of, or you may be at one end of the home range. Some other herd may move at the other end, and you're talking of large areas. So it's not
because
that,
my question was that if supposing that home range or that corridor passes by a village, is it possible that the villagers start to get familiar with the same herd if it comes regularly?
Absolutely. Yes, they do. It has happened, and when we did our project, there's in Gwalpara, for example, I'll come to that. There was a herd, a group actually, a small herd, not very big, about 20 to 25 individuals. It was the same group which would come, and people were familiar with it. So people do become familiar with individuals over time. And also people confuse a lot of, for example, a lot of elephants move in the evenings. So even if there are like 4 or 5 elephants, people think there are 20. So initially when we would go to our villages to work, they would say, oh, there were 100 elephants. Actually, nobody sees. I've never seen 100 elephants. I think the largest group
Because
are.
the other question I had in my mind, and I'm just asking you the questions now
Yes,
because
yes,
I might
yeah,
drop off.
correct.
But these so when you're talking about conserving an entire corridor or an entire home range, you're talking about conserving a large landscape,
Yes.
and through which there is movement, but not all the time every day,
No,
right? So
no,
so what you're saying
no,
is
yeah.
that this landscape is the way it is, and then once in a while a herd moves through it, right?
So you have a home range, and within the home range you have corridors. So it's important to conserve these corridors as much as possible. It's not possible to conserve the entire home range, and with the way things are, you know, with the pressure of development, project pressure, people's pressure. So what is important is to at least conserve the corridors, because these are the movement, So when they move from one part to the other, they use these corridors. You see,
And these
so
corridors can go between districts, between states.
yes, absolutely. They cut across. They do not honor any administrative boundaries.
But
And the
so
land,
when you have to conserve this, you have to involve the governments or the
yes,
local governments of all these various
absolutely.
districts and states and things.
Correct. So that is now what conservation is saying, that big development projects, especially which are funded by multilateral and bilateral agencies like World Bank and ADB, AIB. So they need to be, pressurized too, because mega projects are being funded, which runs into millions of dollars, are being funded by these big agencies and banks. So at their level, because when these projects happen, they have to follow the guidelines, of these banks or the multilateral, these funding agencies. So there has to be pressure, at their end also. And environmental, although there are guidelines given, but very often these are flouted. You see, in India today, I mean, environmental laws are getting diluted, and it's getting worse now, I hear.
Right.
So I don't want to get into that right now.
Right.
So then over time they're getting further diluted, so which means that everything is in danger. And the big dam, for example, a big dam is now coming up, the Lower Subansiri Dam, the border of Arunachal and Assam. And you have elephant corridors there which have been, decimated, but no consideration was, despite pleas and, applications and by conservation groups, by research agencies, to highlight this problem. But it's not, because then it's all in the name of, development, defense, or whatever, whatever the government may.
Nandita, there was a recent article that came in Scroll and was previously also in Munga Bay that I shared in the newsletter that talked about revising regulations for elephant conservation. You're familiar with that, but they were talking about trying to contain the elephants. So how does one actually? I mean, is that even possible?
No, that's a very that's something which is very controversial, debatable, and they tried to do that. Contain means you get the elephants, especially the so-called, as they say, the rogue ones, or the elephants which create trouble, and put them you isolate them, basically keep them somewhere in a forest, and just contain them, that they can't come out. And these kind of experiments have taken place in different countries, and Sri Lanka is one of the prime example. In Sri Lanka this happened. They did this, and they translocated a group of elephants to this famous Yala National Park in Sri Lanka. And this elephants, they stayed, they moved to the border of the boundary of the park, which was of course all electric fencing. They couldn't get out, and they starved themselves to death. They just wanted to go back, and they died. It's a classic, everybody knows, it's a classic example. Leave alone, I mean, I don't know, in Maharashtra about the leopards who were tagged and who were taken far away. They found them, they just come back, So everybody wants to come back to their home, it's like, so that's not a good idea, and that's not going to solve the problem. How many will you contain? It's like people in a jail, So somebody creates trouble, that's what happens. And with human beings, whoever creates more problem is jailed. But here, this is an animal. It's like jailing the elephant. Can you do that? No. I mean, there are other ways you could make the, areas and the lives easier.
Yeah.
But
please keep going with your presentation. Yes.
Yeah. So it's okay. So what has also happened because of the degradation of forests, and now animals are such, and also because the corridors are being destroyed. So elephants are now moving out of their home range and going to newer areas, also creating new home ranges. So this gives a very wrong impression also to people. People think that there are elephants, there's an increase in elephant population, actually. And that's not true. What is happening is that they are becoming more visible now. So people are confusing visibility with increase in population. You see, that's what as conservationists we think, but there are other stakeholders who may think otherwise. So they think that the elephants now, the population increasing, so there's less food, and that's why they are, entering villages and creating this impact to the damage. But in Assam, I could say that although there are no specific, reliable estimates to show this increase in population, I mean, as I would take a more sort of a slightly more critical view of this and say that elephants are becoming more visible rather than, and of course, there may be an increase, but then they're also getting killed. So the increases as not so much as, So it's very important when people talk of conserving, habitat of elephants. It's very important to understand that the corridors need to be focused on. They need to be conserved, and that's the way you'll be able to then. Also, then you'll be able to contain the movement of the elephants. They won't be going to newer areas, and and then people get intimidated and overwhelmed by their presence. And then it's very sad.
Yeah,
Yes,
just a question. I'm interrupting because it's a related question here.
Yes.
He's asking, do elephants mark, quote unquote, their ranges?
No. It's unlike the carnivores or other who, like tigers, for example, or other, who mark their territories. There is no such. So because there is no territory as such. These are just pathways which they follow.
Right.
So you can't really mark, because these pathways are not just used by one herd. They're used by multiple herds. So so that concept, and also they're because the home range is very large, unlike for other animals. So in smaller territories, you can mark, different ways, but here there is no such, And so when elephants do enter, habitation areas, there is retaliation, and this retaliation then happens in sometimes very sad ways. And elephants do get killed. People tend to poison them, use bows and arrows. They use burning rubber balls. All kinds of very harmful deterrents. And more recently, people have started using, direct 220-volt electricity, and there is no control. There's no legislation in the state yet to ban these, and these are all temporary because they do it only during the harvest season. So people don't know. They just use an inverter. So it's fatal to both animals as well as human beings, because by chance you just don't know, at night it happens. And then of course movement of railways is another, trains is another very sad, extremely. And
there was one interaction with the forest officials I did have once, was when the elephants, I think there were 6 of them, when they started coming towards the farmlands of the people living around the forest. So what they did was they lit a potassium firelight, so which basically was releasing a smoke.
Yeah.
Is that safe? Is that okay?
No,
for the
I
elephants?
think use of any chemicals, we don't know what effects. I have not used that, but what we have been, I'll come to that later, what we've been using is like chili smoke, because we know that elephants don't like chili. So use of chemical based smoke, I have not personally observed that, but I wouldn't be surprised, because people, I mean, everybody is ingenious, they want to find new ways, and elephants are also intelligent. and they're finding, so with passing time, they also get used to, the deterrence. In many district states, in many villages in Assam, areas of Assam now, fireworks don't work. I mean, elephants don't get deterred by fireworks at all, or they've got used to the banging of drums or tins, and that also doesn't affect them.
Nice. Yeah.
So that's the other thing, you're dealing with an extremely intelligent animal here, it's not like
Right.
So you have to be one step ahead,
Right.
if you want to sort of, if that's the way you want to see,
Yeah.
So the other problem when you want to deal with this issue is that everybody is looking at, different ways. So there doesn't seem to be a converging point, where people agree. So sometimes maybe, so it's a case of, the 6 blind men and elephant, everybody's on their own trip basically. So sometimes it happens that some groups or stakeholders do converge and try to look for, solutions or ways to mitigate the issue, so they can work across the board. And political drivers are extremely important here and critical here, So like everything else, I mean, wildlife conservation and the ways, mitigation has to happen or you tackle also has its political drivers. So it's no different from any other development problem, be it health sector or education, So very often you see what happens is conflict also happens between the stakeholders, let's say conservationists versus, you don't, we as researchers or we as conservation workers tend to also distrust or mistrust the system, we think that the department should function in a certain manner, but what we forget is that they're also like any other department, and they will function the way they have to, So my understanding is this, and my conviction is that instead of trying to criticize the system all the time, we should also look for ways where we can work with the system. You see, you and I cannot eliminate the system. So there's no point, constantly fighting against a wall.
Yeah.
So we have seen and we have realized that also within the system, you always have sympathetic people, who understand and who work. So where success stories have been achieved, in whichever way, in different fields of wildlife conservation, be it breeding a species or conflict or, ecology, behavior, whatever study, we've seen that people have found, or there are officers who empathize and who are willing to work, with NGOs.
Right.
And now I think a lot of the government state departments are realizing that the NGOs also do have an important role to play,
Right.
and then they come out. So it depends. Sometimes it happens that you may get into loggerheads with certain officials because they misunderstand your point of view or they have their own, constraints. So, but it's very important. Definitely, we know that everything, especially here, political drivers are very important. For example, the issue of encroachment, it's a very political driven issue in Assam. So, and if that is not solved or that is not tackled or we don't find this or we don't take appropriate steps, you'll never find a solution. This conflict will never end. And I don't think this conflict will end either. Otherwise also it's probably will rise. It will rise further, will increase, not just with elephant. Now people are still willing to live with elephant. Now the problem is wild boars, monkeys, that's what is happening. Yeah, so people ask me, they said, you work on elephants, can you help me with boars and monkeys? I said, not so much. I'm sorry. Once I was erroneously called for a meeting with some minister, the state minister in New Delhi, and then suddenly he started asking about monkeys. I said, I'm sorry, but he said, oh, आप तो बंदरों पे काम नहीं करते. मैंने कहा नहीं sir.
Different species.
I said, but it was too late. I said, but I know people who work and I can help you, but I don't. So.
Right.
So anyway, now coming back to our projects, how, I'll just quickly, I'm sorry, I don't want to bore you guys much, but when we started this project, we realized that there were a lot of players, there were a lot of NGOs working, and we didn't want to So we were looking at what scale shall we, if you want to interact and we want the participation of the community for the conservation of the species, at what level should we, enter the, the field? What scale should we work, and what will work, and what will not work? Should we only focus on the elephant, or should we focus on the community? Then we realized that already there are many, organizations and agencies, especially students, researchers who are working on the species itself, the ecology, the behavior. So since as I said, I'm not a trained wildlife biologist, so we thought that it's the community which is suffering right now and needs to be helped. And so our overlying approach was to work through the community, but our main underlying aim was, of course, the conservation of the species. So we started to work at the micro level, that is at the village level. So we did not reach the landscape level. Whereas there are other larger NGOs who have the resources and the manpower, like WWF, WTI, they work on the landscape level. So it works out very well because different people have their own different agendas and responsibilities, and then you are able to tackle, because just by working at the micro level also will not work, because then you will not know the larger picture. How do you cope with it, and how do you in the long term, how do you find solutions to this issue? Right. And if you just keep on working at a landscape level, you also never know what happens in the ground. What's the reality? You could be doing something else altogether. So as I said, as I mentioned before, we are very lucky in Assam that we have a good synergy among NGOs who are working at these different scales, and we are able to share our information and work together. Of course, each NGO has an organization have their own agenda, which they mandate, which they follow, but overall, that helps a lot, as I said. So Chester Zoo came forward in late 2004 to work in Assam, and we started to help them, and we chose 2 districts in Assam to work. One was Sonitpur and one was Gwalpara. So Sonitpur was really in the thick of things then, one of the most affected district, where you could see elephants, as you drive down, even during the day, you could see elephants, crossing the road or in the fields or in the tea gardens. And Gwalpara was just a nascent sort of, the situation had just started to. So basically, we were looking to see that, if you could introduce interventions which in an area where the problems had just begin to start, or maybe, so that it doesn't snowball into a situation which Sonitpur was facing. So the idea
Nandita,
yes,
another 15 minutes for you. Is that okay?
Yeah. So the idea was to help people and then help elephants and then understand their movements, and so we were mostly focusing on the village level interventions, with the people. So the idea was that we'll, if you want to live peacefully or at least coexist with the elephants, then we could help show you the way. So we didn't want to make the communities dependent on us, and so we had to study what the community was, and the kind of community where it would work. We just didn't want to go blindly into a situation. So we had to study the ground situation a bit, and we took the counsel of, we had village level meetings before we actually started working in the field. So the idea was to study what was happening, first of all, how the elephants were moving in the area, and looking at what kind of solutions we could use, and then build the capacity of the people to implement those interventions. And then also finally, if it works, then how do you sort of do a bit of advocacy? How do you spread that message so that people can, and for this we took help of a lot of people. It's not that I don't take the credit, or the project doesn't take the credit of a lot of the interventions which we have introduced. I mean, this is not rocket science. What we were doing is looking at what people were doing in other parts of the world and in India, and we tried to collaborate with people, the experts, people who knew, because we didn't know everything. And in fact, I was quite, to work in that scale, it was a new experience for me. So everybody was grappling, just trying to see what works, what doesn't. So simple things like, So we took help of research organization, of NGOs. In fact, Prachi also came once many years ago, where we shared, our experiences. So so we had to take everybody together with us and work, because that's the best way to go. And so you have people's cooperation, and so this was the kind of land use pattern which you see in the project areas where we worked, mostly agrarian, and then you had tea plantations and a lot of deforestation happening for different. To give us information about the elephant movements, we had a network of informers, or what we call monitors, in our villages, and these were people not PhDs or masters. It was a village tailor or a school teacher or a farmer, who would give us this information. And then we had research assistants who would, coordinate with them and record the incidents of conflict on GPS and other. And then we also trained our field staff and our the colleagues in the colleagues in the field and the monitors in how to use GPS, how to identify elephants. And for this, we took help of NGOs, for our training work of our field staff on elephant identification and monitoring. We took help of Nature Conservation Foundation in Mysore, because they've been doing wonderful work in South India. And we did that. And in fact, they have a very good system. They have come up with, warning system. You can go to their website and see. And so all the information which was collected, at the village level was then compiled and extrapolated at the district level to see. So we then chose and we decided to work on the, micro level. So these yellow little spots you see are actually houses, and then this red parts are the elephant movement areas, how the elephant moves in the village. Then we used a mixture of science plus,
So the elephants are moving right through the village.
These
down
are the
road.
parts. Yeah. Sometimes they do, but they were moving. They were coming from there. Yeah, they were sometimes right through the village. So we had to, for example, here we put then some fences here, and so we did to collect all the information. We use a combination of satellite imagery, data in the field, and so the interventions when we thought of introducing were based on a number of things. One was that that they should be, first of all, acceptable by the the community, so they have to be easy to use. They have to be low tech. So if you use something very fancy, we give them, and if something goes wrong, how will they fix it? They can't come to the cities. So all the interventions which we tried over years, we tried to make them low tech, cheap, low, with low financial input, something which they could do it themselves, and these varied from early warning systems to deterrents to and fencing. So as much as we could, we tried to use, techniques and interventions which were people friendly, user friendly, money friendly, and technology friendly.
Is there anything where is some kind of mobile app which can, the way people track weather or
Yes.
storms? Is it possible to have
that
something
we
like
have
that?
not done it because we had our reasons for not doing it. But as I said, NCF has used that very successfully in Valparai. This system of mobile, and they have these towers where the information goes, and if there's an elephant in the vicinity, then the red light in the tower goes up. So people know when they're walking back from the plantations or moving around in the area, then they know to avoid that area, and they get a message on their phones.
Right.
So you have a simple like trip alarm. As I said, we learned a lot of things. The trip alarm system we learned from Sri Lanka, and then we modified many things. Even the searchlight we modified, and we made some innovations so that it could withstand voltage fluctuations, because the electricity power situation in the villages in Assam is really poor. So we and tried to make the little battery also lighter so that people didn't have to carry it with them. So this was done over time, not overnight, as I said. Then in Africa they had tried chili, where they found that it acted as a deterrent. So we tried that in Assam also. So we used chili smoke, then chili rope, or even simple thing like just using, where the grain is stored. This gentleman who's got this red, you can see the red powder. That's actually simple grain storage bins, which have been covered with a plastic sheet and then chili sprinkled over it. So when the elephant comes and puts its trunk, through the eaves, it can smell the chili and it gets deterred.
Are you using Gojolkia, Nandita? Are you using Gojolkia?
Sorry?
Are you using Gojolkia in your place?
So these storage bins where the paddy is kept. So normally in the layout of homes in the villages is that you have the main house and the granary is a little away from the main house, but it's within the compound, and these are thatch, structures, bamboo structures. So what we did was we just put a plastic sheet over instead of the lid, on the granary bins, the bamboo bins, you put a plastic sheet and we spread chili powder. So when the elephants come and they first tend to put the trunk, through the rafters, so they would, smell, they could get the smell of the chili, and then they would retract. And this is supposedly the hottest chili in the world, but not anymore now. I believe there's some other Mexican, I think. So this is what they call is the Bhot Jolokia or the king chili. It's known by different names in the Northeast. So this is one thing we had. We promoted, and so that people could use this as a source of income also, because this chili commands a very high price and also act as a deterrent, to be used. And then we did this solar power fencing, where so all the interventions which we do are not given free of cost. You see, we've realized that anything which is given free does not work. So, be it making a cook stove or creating a nursery or a plantation or setting up a solar fence, people have to contribute. We do not ask, they can decide financially in cash how much they contribute, but very often it's in kind, because we don't expect people to have ready cash. So they have to contribute in kind, that is giving labor or material. So let's say in a solar fencing where you need the posts, the wooden posts, that people can give from their own, little. Most homes in Assam have a backyard, a garden, homestead garden, where they grow small timber and other fruit and fodder and fuel trees, including bamboo. So they don't have to buy those posts, they can give it, and where the labor is required. So we would give the technical expertise and the material, and the villagers would, So this was for everything. We made it a point, because then there is a sense of ownership and people are willing to take care. So very often interventions don't work because people don't have that sense of ownership, because it's given free. So they don't take interest in maintaining the intervention. So in this case, the onus of maintaining and sustaining the intervention was with the community. So to offset the economic losses, because the villagers could not, villagers could not identify, could not farm. So we started livelihood, training in livelihood also. So giving poultry or in piggery, etc., and helping the self-help groups. So we tied up with the local veterinary department, the agriculture department, spices board, to give this training, because we ourselves are not, trained. And then, and these departments have their own targets. So we would tell them departments that you could, give whatever they give their grants or, the projects which they have. So we would encourage them to encourage the departments, or request them to do it in our villages, which are afflicted by the conflict, so that they can also meet the target and our villages also benefit. So capacity building is one of our main, focus. So this is a training center for women, which we had got support from the MP LED funds, and now we're looking for funds to, provide loom, a sewing machine, and some furniture, so that the local self-help, women of those villages can use this. This is one of the solar fence we have put, so you can see. And then basically to encourage women, we brought this handbook on mitigation, which is available, with us, and we also have another version of it, handouts also, because sometimes which can be accessed. And the entire idea of doing this was to, not make people dependent. Very often a lot of the development programs make you dependent, on the agency which implements the interventions. Here, the idea was to first empower the community, so that with the right, training and encouragement, so that they can sustain whatever. So we have weaned away from a lot of villages. Now these villages where we worked, I mean, we still give them support, but they are able to now move on their own. And we realized that there were certain things. Sorry, I think we've crossed the time. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, Nandita, there's just another question regarding
Yes.
just another method for preventing the elephants to encroach.
Yes.
Somebody's Manav Panjwani is asking, had read a research where they were using bees box on fencing as elephants are not comfortable
Yes.
with them. Does it really work?
See, it has worked in Africa. So there's another debate. In the species which they use in Africa are not the ones which are common here, commonly used in India. So apparently they are not as, they don't behave as aggressively. Although there are, I mean, some NGOs have used it, I believe, in certain, Prachi may have an idea, but the bees have not, have not worked. I mean, I wouldn't say that they have achieved that level of success, what has happened in Africa. It has happened in Africa. So there are, I mean, the ministry is in fact encouraging, so it's the either behavior of the bees, which deters the elephants and their aggressive nature. So we have not tried it. And although we have distributed bee boxes, but more as a source of, income generation rather than for, but we have not tried it. And Prachi may be able to,
Yeah, so I'll talk at the end of it later.
yeah.
Yeah.
So as I said, I mean, whatever I've said may sound like a huge success story, but actually we've had failures also. It's not, everything has not been hunky-dory. We've had a lot of problems where the community, very often the community also does not cooperate very often, because in the past there are other agencies which work with them, and they lost the confidence, and they tend to also get complacent sometimes, because when the interventions start working, then they don't want to continue. Then they get into that comfort zone. They say, oh, the elephants aren't coming anymore, so we're not going to continue doing this. So, and as I said, community conservation programs they work at a slow pace. It takes a lot of time to build a rapport with the community and work with them. So long-term engagement is very necessary. And also we've seen that where the communities are more homogeneous, whether in terms of, because of religion or because of their, occupations, or there the cooperation and the level of success we've had is much higher, And so after a point, we didn't have to go to the villages anymore to work, to choose for selection identification. Villagers would come to us and, ask us to work in their villages. For us, that was our success for us, rather than the number of trainings we did or how many searchlights we distributed. That was not success. That may be a tangible, input for the funding agency, but for us, that was our moment of success. When people came to us, say that, please come and work in our villages. So that, but challenges remain, again, as I said, because there's still so much work to be done. So there is enough space for stakeholders to work, and NGOs. Very often people say that you don't want to be treading on somebody else's feet. It's like my territory. And there's so much to be done that I think we can spend our lifetime, but yet not. And I also don't want to sound cynical by saying that nothing can be done, because if you just sit back and do nothing, that's even worse than doing some, not doing anything, I feel. So my thought is that if let's do it. I mean, there's no harm in helping and seeing, and main thing is to share. So we like to share whatever we have done, our experiences and our failures and our success with other agencies and organizations and individuals, because we don't want people to waste time reinventing the wheel, you see. So you have a lag time, you don't want to waste that, you can go and jump straight and, build on that, improve on that like we did. So thank you so much. And but the other thing I must add is that whatever we are doing, and a lot of other NGOs are doing, it's just firefighting. We're just looking at short-term gains. The long-term, issues like encroachment, like very little data, working with long-term sustaining the community interventions, that people are not looking at it. That's something, as I said, has a lot of political drivers. People are reluctant, a lot of stakeholders are reluctant to work on it. They talk about it in fora, but it doesn't work. So my only fear and apprehension is that people like us, then we keep on meeting, but we're still firefighting. So we have to go beyond firefighting and do things which will sustain, in the long term. And thank you so much for your patient hearing. I'm sorry.
No, Nandita, that was really great. I'm happy because I'm back now. The power's come back.
Okay.
Of course, so much learning, so many questions also. Before people start dropping away, I just want to quickly share with everyone the campaign that we are running to support the Assam Haathi project. Ashwini, maybe you can share the visual. After this, we will open it up to the panel. I think Pooja and Prachi will have a lot to discuss with you, Nandita.
Yeah.
So we'd request our audience to just stay with us, because there's a lot coming up still. Also, after the panel has had a word with Nandita, we'll open it up and we'll take questions from everybody else. But first, I just want to share with you a campaign that Ecoexist started 2 years ago already, where we've worked a lot on the Ganesh festival. And when you were talking about reverence and fear, Nandita, this came back to me that it often happens that when we worship something, either we do it because we want something back from it, or we do it out of fear for what lies in the future. So this combination of reverence and fear exists in our hearts and in our minds. But what we wanted to do with the Ganesh festival was, in particular, bring people's attention back to the to nature, to the elephant, because Lord Ganesha is half elephant and half human, and that symbol itself talks about the coexistence of the human species and the elephant species. And it feels lately like we don't care about the elephants anymore. And so what we started 2 years ago was the Gajanana campaign, and this was with the intention of inviting people, and people do spend a lot of money on the Ganesh festival, to ask them to put aside a fraction of their budget for this festival and send the money over to some group that's working on the ground. This is, again, it's going to take time, but we're happy that some people have started responding to us. Ashwini, you can go to the next one. There are a couple of ways that you can contribute to this. We have a fundraising page on Keto, and we can share the link with you in the chat box. Also, if you'd like to, you can use our GPay QR code, send us the money, and small amounts are also welcome. That's what crowdfunding is about. But do contribute, and you also have our bank details here. Please mention AHP, which stands for Assam Haathi Project, and we'll make sure that your money reaches Nandita and the work that she's trying to do. So this is part of the Revive support network that we've created to enable financial support to reach people that really deserve it. And so as part of the Gajanana campaign, we invite you to integrate this into your celebrations this year, and please help us spread the word to your friends and family also. So with this, I think let's come back to the discussion, which continues and is very educational. Prachi and Pooja, can we have you? Can we have your videos on so we can have a discussion here?
Sure.
Pooja, are you with us? Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Prachi.
Yeah. So first, Nandita, I'm taking the opportunity to thank you. It was like an amazing talk. I have been to her area, her work I have seen, and taken lots of learnings from her, the Assam Haathi project. It was 2011. I think it was
Yeah.
10 years. And
So that's why it's been almost a decade.
yes, and that's where I learned, that our community. So yours is one of the pioneering projects, where you actually work with the community in a very different area, and you're still continuing. So I just want to ask you, how are you sustaining, the people's interest, the commitment, the forest department's trust, in your area?
Okay, so there are two aspects. I must confess that last 3 years, our uh, activities have come down,
Okay,
and that's because of funding.
okay,
So funding has been one of the major issues. So we were getting funding from abroad. It's I think most people would agree with me, at least in the wildlife circles, that much of the conservation work in India, wildlife conservation work, is supported by external agencies. We have very little, I think, support. And because we had sustained, I'm just being honest, because we had sustained funding from Chester Zoo for so many years, and plus through them, we got a Darwin Initiative funds also. So we did not explore domestic funding so much at time. And unfortunately, we had issues with our FCRA. And so we had to put our activities at a lower scale. And now we are, and also thanks to Manisha and her interest, we are now trying to explore domestic funding to restart. So what we are doing is, luckily, as I said, since the project was already operating for almost a decade plus, we were able to put certain, what should I say, certain protocols in place that the people could sustain without our, support. For example, the solar fencing which we had installed, they are still in use. And yes, because first of all, we had ensured that the community had to contribute to the fencing, and we had also arranged for a little corpus where we made it compulsory and with the consensus of the community to contribute to it. So we would ask simple things. If you ask anybody for money, the first thing they would say, "Paise nahi hai, we don't have money." So we would ask them, how much, who smokes, and like betel nut chewing is very common in the Northeast, So people spend money on betel nut and cigarettes. So we would ask. So he said, "How much do you spend in a month?" So somebody would say 100, 200. He said, "All we are asking you to give us 2 days or 1 day's money on your cigarette and your betel nut for this corpus." So we had to find out ways. So some people paid 10. I mean, basically the community decided how much they would contribute. So that became a little corpus, So if the battery had to be recharged or changed, they would do it from that. Then they had also a system of penalty, because the maintenance, in one of the villages, they decided which household gets the responsibility to maintain. So if they didn't do it, there was a dereliction of duty, then he or she would have to pay penalty on it. So this was for one. So, but as I said, in many villages, as I said, people got into this complacency mode, because things like chili fencing and chilies, worked. So then they said, "Theek hai," or they won't use it anymore. So, and then there were certain interventions which would not work. So I must admit that all these interventions either work in combination, and are also certainly dependent on certain conditions. For example, chili smoke. So if there's a wind blowing in an opposite direction, you'll probably not use that, So, and in many cases, because of the changing circumstances around, where in some cases the elephant stopped coming, or the movement became very, sporadic, because of maybe the interventions they used, or they found some other, more lucrative areas to move out. So there people, tend sort of weaned away. They didn't want to, they stopped using some of the interventions. And but the most success, I would say, was with the livelihood ones. And there, I think that suffered in some ways. Definitely it suffered. So people are still, we told people that, "I'm sorry that we won't be able to, do certain, help you out." But they agreed, they said, "Okay, when you have." So the good thing is that, the villages where we work, people understood that this cannot go on forever, somebody trying to give the inputs. And we had initially, when we started to work with them, we had already explained. We said, "We are not here to sort of hold your hands forever. We are just going to show you the path how to walk it, it's up to you now, how you want to do it, So in that sense, we do get queries from villages. They say that when will you work or will you do this training program? So as much as that, we are able to, sort of coordinate with respective departments. If somebody wants a veterinary training, then we facilitate that. So eventually, we also wanted to see ourselves as more as a facilitator, because we are ourselves not sure if our funding will be sustainable and regular. So over time, we realized that we need to also restructure our approach. Now that we know what works and what doesn't work, we were also trying to sort of increase the scale, but yet plan things in such a manner that there would be a multiplier effect, So if there is a corridor and if you're able to save the villages along the corridor, then the villages which are beyond those villages, and the edge would automatically get protected, So some of our thinking on, how to identify those critical villages which need to be protected, or where you have to interventions, that was our next step. So we are hoping that once the funds come in, plus there were some like I had mentioned, that we had built these training centers for women, weavers. So we got the structure up, but we are short of funds to uh, you know uh, uh, sort of house it with furniture and with the looms and with the women. So we started like a yarn corpus also, where we put the initial money for the yarn. The women borrow the yarn, and once they sell the products, they put the money back into that corpus. So definitely, as I said, sustaining community conservation projects is a major challenge. It's a huge challenge. It's something I would say that don't get into it unless you are assured funding for at least 5 years plus, and then you have to build on it, and you have to have the patience and the conviction that you want to continue with. It's not like I can do it, and it's not like a research study where I can continue it for, like, I can do research for 2 years and then I can leave it, because here you're dealing with people and your people's confidence, you're taking people's trust, and you can't betray that trust, so it's very important to make these things also clear to the community. See, very often NGOs also tend to over promise things. So the idea is not to promise. So we never promise anything. We say we'll see. You want to work with us, we'll find out ways to do it. So it's so we've also learned that the way. So we are also in some ways, I wouldn't say use the word suffering. We are not suffering, but the people who need the support, they are obviously suffering. So
Nandita, we have with us Pooja Bhale, who we can finally see now. Pooja, like I said, she has an NGO called Protectera, and we invited her because she's had this unique experience. There were around several elephants that got rescued off the streets of Pune, and she hosted them on her farm. And we wanted her to be part of this conversation to share a little bit about her experiences, because there was a direct contact with the elephant. So we're not talking about wild elephants as such, but Pooja, do you have anything you'd like to talk to her about? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Manita, for inviting me. Such a pleasure, Nandita. It was so nice to hear about your work. Thanks a bunch.
You.
I actually had a question before. Maybe I would
Yes.
draw some parallels from my little learning with the elephants that were with me. I mean, you have a lifetime of work, and I have a few months that they stayed with me. But a few years ago, not too long back, the Maharashtra Forest Department was in a fair amount of conflict with elephants that have regularly been coming from Karnataka over into Maharashtra, and they've done it more than once or twice. And the first few times, the department actually sent them back, and then they decided that these elephants would have to be domesticated because they kept coming back. So clearly, like you mentioned, they have these ancient corridors, migratory routes that they use. Have you had similar experiences out with your project where they have? I mean, you said they obviously don't have administrative boundaries, but what would you suggest in terms of management that they could do better? Because there was a death of a few elephants also in this story when they were being domesticated. So that will lead nicely into the kind of trauma we were dealing with when the elephants lived with us, and psychological abuse that the elephants that we had at the farm were doing. So have you had similar incidences, and what sort of management?
We haven't had that kind of incidences, but yes, you see, the situation is in Northeast is slightly different in the sense that you do have migration not within the state, but even across the states. That is with Meghalaya. Unfortunately, in Northeast, fortunately or unfortunately, some states now they hardly have any elephant population. For example, Mizoram, it's almost gone. Also, there in the recent, the trend is poaching elephants for the meat, rather for ivory. So that has also led to a very low, very fast decline of elephant population in some of the Northeast states. Now, for example, the Gwalpara district of Assam where we work, which is north of Meghalaya. So you do have a population which comes from Meghalaya into Assam, into Gwalpara, in fact, because they are being persecuted in Meghalaya for the meat. You see, so these are elephants which, maybe they were residents originally of Meghalaya, because Gwalpara never historically did not have. They had very good forests and hunting grounds of the old Maharajas, lords, feudal lords, but it does not have any protected area. It has some patches of very good forest, but this there's a group of about 20 to 25 elephants which we had been observing, and they just stay put in Gwalpara. They don't go back, throughout the year. They just live there. So obviously there is a problem there. That's why, otherwise, you see, for elephants, migrating from one area to the other is in there, So there's another problem of elephants then going into Bangladesh. You see, so that's happening. So in Bangladesh, so there was apparently an international, Prachi, you also may be a party to it, or you know about it. They had a, some sort of an association where they're saying that elephants from Bangladesh also tend to come, and then there's a problem here, and vice versa. But the thought of domestication, you see, occurs to the department, obviously, because they see that as an opportunity. They think just because the elephant is moving, is doing these regular sorties, from state to state, they are under the impression that they become domesticated, because it's like their other home, they keep on coming. So why don't we domesticate them? Why don't we tame them, trap them, and use them for our own? You see, the departments are anyway short of trained elephants, because they need for patrolling and other purposes. And since there is a ban by the ministry, capture of elephants and movement of, you cannot move elephants, captive elephants, for example, from one state to the other without a permit, or you're not allowed to catch or capture elephants for domesticating them for whatever use, So for the department, it's the perfect opportunity to, take those elephants, take those animals, because you're using that as an excuse. So the idea is that to give them a safe passage. You see, if you give animals a safe passage, and obviously it is the corridor, and for whatever reasons, maybe the forest department in Karnataka is using some methods, maybe of pushing them, or they don't want them there for whatever reasons. Okay, I'm not so familiar right now with that. Prachi may be able to, add more to it. So they're just the department is taking an opportunity. And as I said, that the idea is to create a safe passage. If you create a safe passage, whether it's inter-district, intra-district, or interstate, and that's why we try to tell people that even when they're putting simple things like electric fencing, you need to keep the thoroughfare clear for the elephant. So you don't create a barrier. The fencing should not create a barrier. The fencing should create a passage, so that the elephants can move easily through that area. So in your case, for example, Pooja, I'm really happy that you have, the fact, I'm sure the elephant must be very happy staying in such a free area without any problems, So obviously there was no conflict in your case. They were happy there. So that's not a conflict. Although for a lot of people, they must be scared or worried. They say, my God, 6 elephants, aren't you scared? What will you do? What are you doing about it? Have you clocked your doors? Have you called the department? Have you chased them? I'm sure you probably had a lot of queries, but good for you that there was no conflict, obviously, because I'm sure the elephants understood this was a safe haven.
Yeah, so I think Nandita, let's hear from Pooja what actually happened. Pooja, can you share with us quickly how this whole thing happened and what you learned from it?
So maybe there are people who learn from you how to, in case elephants enter their territory, what happens,
So the story, Nandita, with these elephants that stayed at the farm was very different. They were largely captive born, captive bred, or probably, have been in captivity for more than 30 or 40 odd years. And the first elephant that came from end of 2015, end of 2014 to about March 2015, she was blind and geriatric, and she was 63. And she was blind in, am I there? Hello?
Yes, I'm
Yes,
just
yes.
sharing
Cool.
the photographs. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So that's Lakhi there, and that's one of my dogs.
Oh.
But she was blind, and he was really naughty. He knew she was blind, so he used to keep making her go around in circles with her. But she was extremely gentle, and the beauty with her was that because I think she had, spent already probably over 50, 55 years in captivity, and she was a begging elephant. Her temperament was very different. She used to be moving around freely across the 2 or 3 acres that we had, and she was only sort of tied with a small rope at night so that we didn't have to keep running behind her. However, the other four that came just about 20 days after her, so she went on to Mathura to Wildlife SOS. So the one on the right where I'm in the green t-shirt was one of the younger elephants that came, and she was also, so they were a herd of four, and they were rescued from a circus in Karjat, and in transit these elephants stayed with me, Manisha. So the farm served as a pit stop for them till their transfer permits from state to state came, and they were all due to be sent to the wildlife rehabilitation center up in Mathura. So the herd behavior for the other four was very, very different, to the effect that because they had the psychological abuse that Lakhi, the older elephant, had, was very different from the psychological abuse that the other four had. So there was two males and one female, and two females in the herd of four that came. And this little one that I'm standing with, actually, this picture looks very nice. About 30 seconds later, she had like toppled me on my back. She had like just whacked her trunk at me and thrown me off. But she was young. She was only 6. She's still alive. Lucky is no more. She died of old age now. But she was 6 years old, this one. And we were hoping to be able to help her with her psychological trauma, because the older female that was there, they do this head bobbing continuously. So they bob their head continuously like that. Like she was in fact doing it for more than 17, 18 hours a day. And that is testimony to how psychologically abused and hit that she was. So, the difference, I guess, is these were not wild elephants at all. But the interesting thing, like you said, that elephants are very intelligent. About 3 days before Lakhi was due to be transported to Wildlife SOS, we were so comfortable with her by the end of 3 months that she was kind of just left on her own, doing her own thing and so on. And one day we were all like chit chatting, the Mahots and the Chara cutters and everybody. We were sitting and chatting, and she was doing her own thing. About half an hour, 45 minutes in, I was like, let me go check on the elephant. Dekhe aate Haathi kya kar raha hai. And so we went. So I walked over to the side where she used to generally graze, or like take off all the trees we were trying to plant. And I was like, I can't see the elephant. So I went back to her mouth. I like, Sonu, Haathi nahi hai. And he's like, पेड़ के पीछे देखो. I said, Sonu, we are talking about an elephant. पेड़ के पीछे हाथी नहीं रहेगा. And she had disappeared. She had disappeared into thin air. And the beauty was that we have a small rock boundary of about 2 feet high that demarcates the farm. And she had stepped over this boundary without toppling a single stone. Mind you, this is an 89-90% blind elephant. So she had just perception of light in one eye. But she'd stepped over this boundary and gone off about 2 kilometers down the road and messing around in the forest over there. And finally, we figured out where she is when one guy on a bike came riding down saying, "Arey, aapka Haathi idhar hai." And we like, she just happily, she hadn't broken a tree. You would know that an elephant crossed. So the learning for me was so incredible that you kind of let them be. And even with that, they know what they know. They're just gentle, and they kind of knew what they were doing. And it is said that you can rehabilitate one of the animals you can rehabilitate back to the wild is elephants, because they adapt and they're intelligent enough to do it. So very interesting stuff. So the nut
one of the
herd.
questions that occurs to me, both Pooja and Nandita, just fast forwarding, we've got less than 30,000 elephants left in the wild. From the sounds of it, it's going to be really, really difficult to minimize or reduce the human-elephant conflict, especially because development is growing beyond our control. So what is really the vision? What is the future? Are we going to breed elephants in captivity and then maybe hopefully release them in the wild later, what's going to happen like 50 years down the line? What do you see as the future for the elephant populations, Prachi? All of you, what do you think?
Nandita.
No, I thought she said Prachi.
all three of you.
No, I don't want to be that cynical and say that you need a captive breeding program. No, definitely.
No, I'm just
never.
putting it out
No,
there
I
because
know. I'm just
yeah.
kidding. No, definitely not. See, there is hope. I don't see, I think we just need to put our heads together and, do it willingly and not just have, I think all of us are still like six blind men, basically, people, and we are not willing to converge and have that synergy, although we talk about it. So I don't think captive breeding, that situation will come, but there are many things, which uh, about, I think 7-8 years ago, in fact, there was a wonderful document which had come where recommendations were giving what should be done, but unfortunately none of the, very few of those recommendations have been followed up. So the answers are already there. It's just that it has not been happening, and we don't know how to get this done, because if the ministry can take a few steps, even if it takes a few crucial steps, that helps a lot.
There's no political will behind it.
There's political will is all misplaced. It's there, but it's misplaced. So that's one major issue. I mean, NGOs and all over the globally, especially where the Asian elephants are concerned, we have a ICUN group, Asian elephant species group, and it's doing wonderful work, and everybody is willing to come together and work for it, But in our own ways, you're doing it. But I think we still need a lot to do, and I think that willingness and plus the focus. See, even though elephant has been declared as a,
Schedule 1.
Schedule 1, that's there, but it doesn't enjoy the same perks, I would say, as the tiger does. On one hand you talk of elephant god and you say this, and then on the other hand you don't seem to care so much.
No, so on this point, Nandita, how can we help in this sense?
Yes.
Like, what I'm trying to do with Gajanana, I kind of, when we're talking about there being no funds available for this, there's crores of rupees going into the Ganesh festival, right?
Yes.
And so my question is, why can't we, even half of that go into actually protecting the elephant? So my question is, how are we going to turn this around also in the awareness of people's minds, even if they're sitting in the city and they may never be able to come out there and see the work you do? What is it that we can do to help with this?
Okay, so there are ways. I mean, first of all, the very fact that this thought has crossed your mind itself is very commendable. So I don't think we should feel helpless and say that, sometimes, it looks pretty bleak that elephant population is going down, conflict is increasing, nothing can happen, and what can we do about it? So you can do in your own little way. So people who are willing to contribute, it doesn't matter, as you said, what it can be, whether in cash or kind. And there are various components, of working, of conservation. So it's not just restricted to, let's say, community conservation. You have advocacy, as you said, there is awareness. So there are a lot of different individuals, organizations, and institutions who are working in these different aspects. So if an intervention, a community intervention, if it takes a lot of money, you could always find, and if you have your resources are few, then you can always give it to an organization or somebody who's working, let's say, on awareness. If you think awareness is something which is lacking and needs to be upgraded or scaled out, so they can do it. So one organization need not do everything, that's important. And so awareness, advocacy is very important. So if an organization which is, let's say, already working on it, so I'll just give an example of an organization called Green Hub. It's a program called Green Hub in Northeast India, which is started by a young filmmaker called Rita Banerjee, where every year, in collaboration with a local NGO called NEN Northeast Network, they have a program where 20 youth, who come from underprivileged backgrounds, are trained in videography and photography on conservation issues. And then they make these short films, and and they also intern with other wildlife conservation organizations, and then they produce and make short films or material, audiovisual material, but based on videography, to spread the message, to spread awareness. So organizations that can, help in the awareness. So, or let's say somebody who's working on, you also need to do a bit of research. So you can also, so you need not just focus on one issue. There are so many issues, so you can choose. So people also should not feel helpless saying that we can't do, what will we do, we're just sitting in cities. So even the fact that they're able to spread this message among their family, their friends, a simple thing like using idols which are made from eco-friendly material itself is a step towards it. So in your own, or somebody who's, let's say, working in a let's say a corporate, and every corporate house today has a their social responsibility cell. They can go a department, so they can talk about that issue, whichever, an issue which requires attention, not necessarily conflict, whichever, so in your own ways you can contribute, you can volunteer. If you cannot pay cash, you can volunteer your services, you can help out if you're working.
Prachi and Pooja, what do you have to say? What is your vision for the future?
I was about to say, first thing I want to say is that, we worked with Manisha 4 years back, with the same campaign, Gajanan campaign, and we really got some very good, funding, which we are using it for our area for, making these different kind of audio deterrent units. So we got some good crowdfunding. So I wanted to thank Manisha for her initiative to do this and associate, Ganesh with elephants and, get people's attention. So it really worked, and I really hope that it works with Nandina and Vanita's campaign also. So that is one. And the second thing, what you mentioned about the future, I feel that, it has to have integrative methods. Like we need to have a more of a holistic approach, whatever works. I feel because every landscape is different. Like because we mentioned just before about the bee fencing. Now, see, bee fencing, a lot of people are saying that it doesn't work. In our area, the farmers are able to keep the elephants away. We are doing very different kind of fencing, Nandita. We are using Apis cerana, and we are focusing on natural colonization and not introduced bees. So that is one other way. So we need to keep experimenting, and they are also able to harvest honey. So they are getting good, handsome profits. So I consider this as a palliative measure. If there will be successes somewhere failure somewhere.
Yes.
But this is a very harmless method, and there's no harm in continuing and experimenting with this. So it's not to be dismissed of, because it's not harming elephants, and it's profiting the farmers. So that is my take. And I would say, yes, we need to rotate and come up with more different methods, and community participation is very, very important. Because that's where I think Nandita takes her, she's the person where she pioneered the work, and I guess that is the way to go ahead with other kind of, methods.
No, I definitely agree with you, Prachi. I'm sorry if there was a miscommunication of bees. What I meant was that in our area, we've not had, but the idea is, as I said, to learn, what works, innovate it, and it works, it's excellent, and that's what we did.
I just want to ask Pooja, being in the city, how do you think we can actually get the attention of the urban dwellers or Pune citizens to these issues? What do you think, Pooja?
So when I was working for Belinda up in Delhi, and I was the conservation officer for the wildlife trade stuff that we were doing. One thing that I realized with that work was the bar of awareness in terms of these things is very less. So she had one of the projects, the Wildlife Protection Society had one project with the Jaipur fort elephants, and were trying to raise awareness with urban people that even the riding of elephants is directly detrimental to wild populations, because that's the kind of attitude we develop regarding the animal. That this animal is a resource. And one of the things that we were doing there, and which I still do through my organization currently, though not directly for elephants, is to create a point of sensitivity when it comes to these species. When we start to feel, you have on-ground projects like Nandita's project is there, like Prachi's work is there, yet the impact on conservation is maximum through the population that's sitting in the urban world, right? Development is really for the urban population, not for the rural population. So if there is, I feel a lot of the work that can also be done in urban setups is to raise the sensitivity of people towards species like the elephant, and making them understand what they actually go through. जो पता ही नहीं है उस पे क्यों मदद करेंगे, right? There is no awareness about it. To most people, elephants are what you ride at the fort, or what you see in a temple, and they don't realize that there are wild elephants that are struggling with huge stuff, and we have that population. In my time in South Africa, where I was working with a private game reserve, one thing that I learned was, and this is also something that Belinda told me many years ago, was that as long as a dead elephant costs brings you more money than a live elephant, saving it would be very difficult. And what Africa kind of figured out is it figured out that there is money in its wildlife. And because there was money in its wildlife, the local community started actually helping in protecting those. So I don't know. India's situation is very, very different. We are a much more human-dominated landscape. Wildlife tourism is not. We don't put figures on wildlife tourism. So 20 years ago, there was a report of Madhya Pradesh that the tiger reserves of Madhya Pradesh raised enough money to support the entire economy of Madhya Pradesh at a point of time. But this was not capitalized on. I think if we are able to show that these pockets can bring money to the state also, because we have a top-down conservation approach, right? So we have to let them know that keeping the elephant alive is, yeah, it's great for the ecosystem, but they don't really care about that. But it's bringing you money. Unfortunately, as nasty as it sounds, money and economy is going to matter more when it comes to political will. So raising the sensitivity, according to me, towards species, and then helping the government realize the asset of money in our wildlife will kind of
Great. So
work
thanks
very
all
well.
of you for those insightful comments. Before we wrap up, I just want to invite, there are a few participants with us still. If anyone would like to interact with Nandita and with Prachi and Pooja also, you can please raise your hand. There's a question here about elephant contraception. Is there a plan for elephant contraception to keep their population in check? What are your views on this, Nandita?
We don't need contraception, we need more procreation.
So that question actually, Manisha, comes from what's being tried in Africa. So in Africa, they wanted to cull elephants, but culling was not ethically supported. So they looked. In fact, my friend who I worked with, who's a vet, wildlife vet, he was in charge of some contraception procedures in Southern Africa.
Well,
And to the person who's asked that question, it's a more humane way of going about in population control, but it's an extra, dart an elephant, put it to sleep, sedate it, contracept it, and they tried easy story there.
in
In
fact,
India, it's not applicable,
sorry.
right?
No, I think it's African, for the African scenario, definitely, I'm sure they're looking for ways. In fact, in South Africa, in Kruger and some of the parks, when they have to cull, they cull the entire, group.
Third, yeah.
Or the entire, they don't. In fact, there were a few groups in South Africa who tried to impress upon the wildlife, whatever department or the park department, that instead of culling, I mean the entire, why don't you give us and we'll train, But they were not willing. They said that they would just.
They were even removing tusks at one point, right?
Yeah.
They were cutting the tusk off as close as possible, so poaching went down. So the elephant was not being
So
killed
this
for the ivory
contraception
itself.
thing, the government here is thinking more in terms of monkey conflict. In Uttarakhand, there was a serious talk of doing that in among the rhesus monkeys, because that's what is now a major problem. So
By the way, Nandita, for your monkeys, one thing that had worked very well in the Konkan region that we tried is getting life-size casted leopards of different body shapes and body types, and putting them around farms. The langurs and the rhesuses refuse to come within miles of the farms.
That's excellent. Maybe next time somebody asks me. Thank you so much. I must definitely keep this in mind and tell.
What the farmer used to, he had only one. So what he used to actually do is he used to move the leopard around ever so often, so that the monkeys were like, this thing actually moves. It's not worth it.
Okay, like a scarecrow. That's great. I think, thanks. I mean, this is a good low-tech, effective.
Very creative.
Yeah,
there's a lot of creativity in these solutions.
No, that's really good.
Yeah. So I think we're running over time now, and I'm going to have to wrap it up here, but it's been extremely educational. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, especially Nandita.
And
my
I
pleasure.
hope that we can all stay connected. I'm glad that Prachi and Pooja and Nandita are here together too. So there's that
Yeah,
connection
that's
happening.
a
Thank
good
you so
thing.
much.
And please send us your blessings that we can really
Oh, no,
have a
definitely.
good PT together for Nandita this year also.
Thank you so much.
Just before we wrap up, I just want to share what's coming up next on Revive. Ashwini, please, would you share the slide? So usually we do the Revive sessions every Sunday. We are not yet quite sure who's coming up next Sunday, but this is just to show you the people who have agreed. We have Praveen Pardeshi, who some of you may know. He just recently, actually in the last few weeks, has moved to Geneva, but he has promised to keep his commitment to us. He will be talking to us about the matrix between governance, environment, and development. This may happen next Sunday or the Sunday after. We'll let you know about the dates. And then we have some very interesting conversations coming up with Dr. Charles McNeil, who has been senior advisor to the UNDP. He was with the UNDP for 20 years and he just retired from there. He has created an initiative called the Interfaith Initiative for Forest Conservation. So he's going to talk to us about the connection between faith and conservation. I'm really looking forward to that because that's what we're trying to do with the Ganesh campaign also. After him, we have on the 13th of September, Edwin Birnbaum, who's going to join us from Berkeley, California. And he's going to talk to us about sacred mountains, especially with Mount Kailash and Badrinath, to see how the conservation efforts around those mountains are going. And then, because there has been so much talk about the EIA draft regulation and the changes being made in it, we are going to be joined by a good friend, Kanchi Kohli, again part of Kalpavriksh initially. And she has been researching environmental legislation for many, many years now.
I think there is some network issue.
Manisha, are you there?
Manish,
Okay.
Yeah.
network issue at your end, but then, so Ashwini, we can have the slides again to tell everybody that we have these things coming up. So in case Manisha joins till then, it will be great.
I think she's joining. 1 second.
Yes, right. So we can just have the slide again.
I'm back here now. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's been we've had a bit of an explosion with our inverter for this, but I'm back on. So yeah, so this is what's coming up for Revive, and I really hope that all of you will join and also help us spread the word about Revive, because there's some very interesting conversations happening. And I think the last slide is just where you can reach us, Ashwini. So these are contact details. Also, if you would like to reach out to Nandita, maybe Nandita, can you share your email address with us? And
now shall I?
Yeah, you can put it on the Q&A or the chat box.
Okay.
If you read it out to us, Ashwini can do it.
No, I'll just.
You can type it up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if anyone wants to continue the conversation with Nandita, please feel free to email her or email us, and I can connect you.
I'll just put it in the chat.
You can put it
chat.
in the chat.
Yeah, chat will just be easier. Huh?
Yeah.
1 sec.
Ashwini, can we have the last slide, please? Yeah, so that's just our contact details. I think some of you are already familiar with us, but if you need to reach us, this is where you can do it. And we'll really look forward to having you with us again next Sunday. Thank you so much again, Nandita, and please stay connected and stay safe.
Thanks a lot, Manisha. Thank you for thanks to everybody for the patient hearing and also for connecting.
Yes. Okay.
And for all your efforts, thanks. We are really grateful. Much appreciate. Okay, bye. Thank you. Bye. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Pooja.
Bye.